Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for giving me your ears and your eyes on this fine day. Well, at least it's a fine day here in the UK. And I hope you're all doing well, surviving this coronavirus madness, and so on and so forth. Right. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about an issue, which is prepositions and the law, as you guys can tell from my little image there in the front. Prepositions list, right? And this prepositions list is prepared in such a way as let's put it this way, it's clearly done for children. If you have a look at it, it's clearly done for children, and because this is a sort of thing you should learn actually as a child. Unfortunately, most adults go into their adulthood and not knowing anything about prepositions whatsoever, and this is a very, very sad fact, and it's why they actually get confused then when reading the Bible, because they are basically functionally illiterate and they don't know how to pick everything apart, and they don't know why things are said in the way they are. So prepositions, what are they? Prepositions are basically, as if we, again, let's go back to the little our little, whoop, wrong one, our picture over there in the beginning. We have a very interesting, so about, above, according to, across, after, because, before, behind, below. So these basically are prepositions, are words that indicate your relationship, right? And this is a very important word. They indicate your relationship to a particular object or subject or whatever the case might be, right? So if I say this X is on top of, or below of, or parallel to, or next, or under, and so on and so forth, then you know that what the person is trying to describe is a relationship between the two, between the object and the subject, or the two subjects or the two objects, or whatever the case might be. Right. So why do I bring this up? What does this have to do with the law? Because, ladies and gentlemen, stop me if you've heard this one before, right? We are not under the law. Right? Do you ever hear that? Right? So when it comes to any argument whatsoever about whether or not the Ten Commandments are meant to be observed or taken seriously, one of the most frequent retorts that you get back is, we're not under the law, right? And they say this as a motto that is just thrown out, a slogan that is thrown out, something they've heard, something they learn, and they imagine that they understand what it means, but in fact they have absolutely no clue whatsoever. And even then, those who affirm the law, right, those who affirm the law, then again, further still, as soon as it comes to the question of the fourth commandment, they're quite literally willing, for the most part, to throw the baby out with the bathwater and then get rid of the entire law then altogether, right? Bring in murder and adultery, by all means. Just don't make us observe the Sabbath is sort of the kind of attitude and the mindset that I get from people. Hyperbole, of course, ladies and gentlemen. I don't honestly think that these people believe that they are vying and voting for murder and rape, etc., and theft. Okay, it's a joke. Right. So when we're talking about under the law, when we're under or over, essentially so you've basically, well, you've got the law, right? You've got the law, and you've got you know, your tablets of stone, right? And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Right, these first 4 dictate your relationship to God, and then the last 6 is your relationship to, as we've discussed on previous videos, your relationship to each other, to human beings. And so basically, when you say that you are under the law, right, they say we are not under the law. So what does it mean to be under the law, right? And where were you before you were under the law is the question, right? So to be under the law means that what you move from under the law. What does this actually mean? Where were you? What was your preposition before you were next to the law? Right? A term that we use is called you are law abiding. Right? You are law abiding. You walk according to the law, right? You walk righteously according to the law. But as soon as you break the law, right? So you are next to the law when you're walking and living your life according to its precepts. As soon as you break one of them, your position then goes from being next to under. So you are then under the condemnation. Right? Condemned. Right? Condemnation. Right? You are now condemned. You are under the law. So you are now under whatever punishment is prescribed by the violation of the law, and then that is then death. Right? So we were law abiding, right? Or a person can be law abiding, break the law, now they're under the law. So we have words like, you say you are under arrest, for example, right? You're not actually underneath anything, but we're describing your relationship to your freedom, right? You are being arrested, you are being halted. Halted in what? You are being arrested, or because the word arrest is to stop someone from doing something. You arrest, stop a particular thing from going on. What particular thing are you preventing from going on? Well, you are arresting them. You are stopping them in their tracks from their activity of breaking the law, is what you're doing, right? You are arresting them, and then you take them off in order to have the condemnation or the punishment visited then upon them in a court of law, prison, community service, whatever the case might be, right? So whenever you read the Bible, from the beginning to the end, it's always, you are always, right, in a particular relationship to the law. Always, even in the New Testament. Why? Because here is a question, right? And this is very, very, very important. We also say to people what? You are never above the law. You are never above the law. You are never, ever above the law. Which means that the law comes basically from you. Right? So if you are a dictator, you are above the law, in a sense, right? You can do what you want. You can even violate your own laws and be self-contradictory, and nothing happens to you. Okay? But now, but everyone agrees, no one is ever above the law. No one is ever above the law, which means you can't make it up. You have no right. No, if you are either law, if your relationship as a human being is exclusively one of two prepositions, one of two things. You are either next to the law, as in you are law abiding, and that's your relationship to the Ten Commandments, or you are under the law, under its condemnation. And if you are under the law, right, if you are here, then you need grace and salvation. Right? There we go. You need grace and salvation if you are under the law. And that makes sense, right? So let's say you need grace. And you need grace and salvation if you are down here. Right. Now, here's very important. Where is God? Here. Where is God? Now, most people, even Christians, would say that God is there. This is actually incorrect. God is not above the law either. In fact, there is no such thing as someone who is above the law. It doesn't exist. Okay? God is the law. So if we make this, so you've got your tablets of stone, right? God is the law, right? We say God is love. Remember, the Bible says that to be loving is to fulfill the law. To fulfill the law is to be loving. and God is love, right? We do not say so. So the Euthyphro dilemma does not apply here as most atheists would think, and this is why most Christians would say that God is above the law. The reason they would say that is because they have gotten used to the way secular people think, right? Greek philosophy and all these kinds of things. But in Christianity, we don't believe this. We believe God is in fact the law. Why? Because we believe the law is a reflection of the character of God, right? So therefore, so a lot of people ask, well, can God just make up a new law contradicting his previous laws? And the answer would be no, because in order for that to happen, God would have to change in a fundamental way. It would be like the USA. If the USA had to take its constitution and get rid of it, that would mean that the USA as a nation would be changing in a highly, exceptionally fundamental way, right? And it's the same thing with God. God will never change any of these laws because they are a reflection of his character, right? And not the fourth either, because the fourth means that he is creator, right? Is remember the Sabbath day. A lot of people make the mistake, like I explained in a previous video, of putting the fourth along here with these ones over here, but this is not the case. The fourth commandment has nothing to do with your relationship with each other. It has to do with your relationship with God as the creator, right? And he therefore, because he is creator, he is therefore the one who has the authority in the first place and the jurisdiction in the first place in order to make a law at all, which is why we should abide it, right? And allow that it is that because he is the creator and because the creation itself is an expression of who he is, it is then only natural that we then follow whatever law is an expression, therefore, of who he is. And we know this is the case, right? No one is above the law, right? Even if you go to a person's house, right? You go to a person's home, they have rules in their home. The parents, right? The parents are not above the law, right? Because the law is an expression of who they are. So if you have bad laws in a home, it's because the parents are bad. And if you've got good laws in the home, rules, whatever the case might be, then you know you have good parents. So the law is a reflection of the character of the individual. And the law will change only if the individual's character changes, right? It's very, very simple. So no one is above the law. Now, here's the thing. People can contradict themselves, right? It's what we call hypocrisy. So God will never ever, if God had to change a law, not only would he have to change in a fundamental way, right? But if he doesn't then change in a fundamental way, now God himself says he doesn't change, right? God never changes. Therefore, if God never changes, it means the law will never change, ever, not one jot nor one tittle, right? So if God never changes, the law will never change. Therefore, God will never just arbitrarily think up a new law and put that in force, okay? It just won't happen because he does not change at all in his essence or in any way, right? Now, then can he still modify the law? No, because if he then did, then God would be self-contradictory, right? If he made like an 11th law or whatever the case might be, or said, no longer, let's get rid of that one, I'm not going to call it something else, then basically God would be contradicting himself, right? And people do it all the time. Human beings, it's again like it's what we call hypocrisy, where it's one standard for everyone else, but it's another standard for me. And we see a lot of this going around in the world today, don't we? It's just, well, it's the basis of narcissism. Basically, it's one standard for you and it's another standard for me. So you get a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of incoherence, a lot of self contradiction and stuff like that, and a lot of just abject nonsense when people are talking about these things. Now, because God, right, the law is a reflection of who he is, therefore to be law abiding is equivalent to walking with God. You understand what I'm saying? Right, so whenever we say our walk with God, in the Bible, your walk with God is obviously talking about your relationship with him. And your relationship with him is identical to your relationship with his law, because his law is a reflection of his character. It's that simple, right? And so basically, when you are saved, when you receive salvation, when you receive grace, you move from here. You are no longer under the law. You go back. You change places in relation to the law, in relation to God, right? You are never without the law, right? When you say you are under grace and therefore not under the law, grace is literally, it's lifting you from this position back to being walking with Christ, walking with God. You go from being under to being next to, from being under condemnation to be law abiding, from being a criminal to being law abiding, from being a lawbreaker to being righteous. And everything is defined this way in the Bible. Without exception, the Bible, God talks about his law and obeying and abiding by the law and your relationship with him and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's so obvious. I mean, you have the same thing with I mean, let's take marriage, right? Let's take marriage. You are either, and the marriage has its own rules, right? So, you know, don't cheat, don't beat up your wife, don't beat up your husband, don't swear at each other, be kind, be caring. Marriage has with it its own rules. You either abide by them so that you have a relationship, or you break them, and so then you end up in divorce. You end up with divorce. And why do I use marriage? Because doesn't God say that he talk about a marriage to the church, right? Didn't he divorce? He divorced Israel. Why? Because they wanted the law, but they didn't want Christ. They wanted the law, but not the lawgiver. And now Christians today, we have a problem, right? So Christ, okay, moves us. So Christ has a law, right? So Christ's grace moves us from being under to being next to, where we abide with Christ in eternity, right? So in the Old Testament, the Pharisees rejected Christ. We want the law, but we don't want Christ, right? So we want the law, but Christ, no, we reject it, right? That was their problem, because obviously you can't separate the two. Now here's the problem, right? In modern day Christians, right, we want Christ, but we don't want the law. It's still a mistake. Still a mistake. We haven't gotten anything right. You have to have both, because it's about a relationship. If the law is an expression of the character of God, the character of Christ, you can't separate the two, right? So in the Bible, the primary consideration, right, is relationship, right? The Jews basically forgot that this had to do with a relationship. So Christ came to earth to show them, listen, this has to do with a relationship. They said, no, we want the rules, but we don't want the relationship. We want to keep all of these traditions, but we want no relationship. So it was cold and right. So it's like that whole thing between law and grace and works and grace and faith and all that kind of stuff, right? They wanted works, but there was no grace. They wanted works, but there was no faith, right? So the Jews, they only had part, right? So they had works, right? That's what they had, but no faith. Faith and grace. None of that, right? But now Christians, we make a similar mistake. We have faith and we have grace. We want grace. We want the relationship, but works, no, we don't want that. We don't want it at all. You're still getting it wrong. You know, doesn't James say, I'll show you my faith by my works? You show me your works and I'll see your faith, whatever the case might be. I'm going to get wrong, I'm paraphrasing, right? It's all about a relationship, right? And the reason why we get this wrong in a lot of ways is because, again, we have a dialectical way of thinking, right? We believe that where you have law, right, you then do not have grace. For example, no, we must have grace. We can't, otherwise we're legalistic. And we believe where you have law, you don't have relation. We don't have relationship. We don't have anything. But obviously, if you've got relationships and stuff and grace, so for example, if there wasn't a law that condemned you as a sinner, right? If you got rid of that, right? So because you've got a law that condemns you as a sinner, you then need grace, right? Because then grace uplifts you back to the relationship. REL for relationship, right? Back into line with the relationship sort of thing. But if you get rid of the law, then if there's no law, then there's nothing to say that you're a sinner. And if there's nothing to say you're a sinner, then you don't need grace. And then this is point, which means that none of this was necessary in the first place. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, in future, when you use the catchphrase, "We are not under the law," please remember very carefully what that actually means, right? Yeah, that's true. We're no longer under the law, but that's because Christ has given us forgiveness. But it means that we move back to our original position where Adam and Eve were before they sinned, which was what? They were law abiding. They obeyed the law. Right? It's that simple. It's about restoration, right? The Bible talks a lot about restoration. We are being restored. Restored to what? Exactly. We're being restored back to the relationship between us and God and His law. It's that simple. It's not a very complicated, and people complicate it, man, but it's literally that simple. Okay. So anyway, I hope that clarifies stuff. I get very frustrated when I hear people, "Oh, but we're under grace, therefore out with the law." It's like, no. You know, it's just not being under grace is just another way of saying, right, you are now law abiding. You are righteous. That's the very definition of the word righteous, means that you are law abiding. And if you get rid of the law, you can't be righteous, because then there's nothing to say that you are righteous. And if there's no law, so without a law, there's no such thing as righteousness, and there's no such thing as sin, because there's no measure or standard against which we define what is righteous and what is sin. It's that simple. All of these terms, if there is no law, all of these terms become utterly meaningless. Their foundation in the law of God and in the character of God. Because again, it says you need to be like Christ. Well, if the law is a reflection of Christ's character, then boom, there we go. In the New Testament, obey the law, because Christ didn't violate the law himself, and he wouldn't, because it was a reflection of his character. And he would never say that any part of it, and that's why he says no part of it will ever be gone, none, ever. You can't change it, because it means if you say that the law changes in any way, then it means that Christ has changed somehow. That's a problem, right? It's a problem. You know, and then Christ is our rest and stuff like that, you know. Oh, well, you know, but then, like, for example, for the Sabbath, right, you get, oh, well, then Christ is our rest, then we go into greater relationship with him. You can't have a relationship with Christ if you are breaking the law. It's just if you can't, if you, right. So for example, by saying, oh no, well, we will reinterpret the Sabbath commandment to mean that it's a relationship with Christ. Christ is our rest. Yeah, true, Christ is our rest, absolutely. But it doesn't mean that you then get rid of what he's still explicitly required of you. Then what you're doing is you're being like Cain. Because Cain is like, well, I will offer a sacrifice, sure, but I'm going to offer this sacrifice instead of that sacrifice. And God rejected it. It was still a sacrifice. It was still his first fruits. It was the best of his field and all, but it wasn't what he explicitly asked for. So he rejected it, right? You can't claim to love God and be in a relationship with him if you are not doing the absolute minimum that he explicitly requested of you and reinterpret it to mean something else that is more convenient for you. It doesn't work that way, right? You wouldn't do that with your wife. You wouldn't do that with the government. You wouldn't do that with your boss, right? And we want to do that with God. I mean, he's only given you 10 commandments. He's only given you 10, right? You can't even do that. You know, that's a bit crazy, really, you know. But anyway. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That was hopefully a short one. I can't see how long I've been recording for. 26 minutes. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that helps you and brings some clarity as to my way of thinking. Take it easy. Cheerio. Goodbye, and God bless.